Evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our program, A Black Intellectuals Odyssey. My name is Helen Liu, and I am the Programming and Partnerships Manager at Cary Library. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank the Cary Library Foundation. Their support enables us to bring programs like tonight's event to you. This program is in partnership with the Association of Black Citizens of Lexington and the Lexington Historical Society. This program is being recorded and will be posted to the library's YouTube channel. If you have any questions, please submit them to the Q&A. Now I'd like to welcome our guest this evening. Marion Kilson and her family lived in Lexington for 47 years. During those years, Marion was a faculty member or administrator in several colleges and universities in Greater Boston. She received her PhD in social anthropology from Harvard in 1967. She retired as the Dean of the Graduate School of Salem State University in 2001. Her anthropological research in West Africa has led to several books and many articles, including Play Lala, Ga Religious Songs and Symbols, and Dancing with the Gods. Though Marion no longer lives in Lexington, she is still the chair of the Older, Wiser, Lifelong Learners Program Committee for FCOA. Marc St. Louis is a native of Western Massachusetts. He has lived in Lexington with his wife, Carrie, and their two children since 2005. A graduate of the University of Virginia and Boston College Law School, Marc has worked in a variety of areas in law, public service, and government relations for several civic, private, and public entities and organizations. In Lexington, Marc has been active as a town meeting member, co-chair of the Lexington Democratic Town Committee, government committee chair of the Association of Black Citizens of Lexington, and as a volunteer with the Lexington Education Foundation. He is also a current board member of the Cary Library Foundation and coaches several youth athletic organizations in town. Welcome, Marion and Marc. I will now let you host the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. I'm Marc St. Louis. I'm happy to be moderating this discussion with Marion. Welcome, Marion, and excited to for this discussion about the Martin Kilson's Odyssey and intellectuals, a Black intellectuals Odyssey. Tonight, this format will be we're going to have we've had the short introduction, then we're going to have a presentation from Marion, and talking about the stories about the book and Martin's life and work. Then from there, we'll do a book dialogue, just discussing the book and some observations and how it came to be for Marion. From there, we'll try to answer some questions, any questions that you may have and the audience may have. Again, you can put any questions that you have after the presentation into the Q&A, and then we'll sort through those and be able to answer them as best we can. And then I'll close at the end of the program. So for a little background, welcome to all those joining us on Zoom tonight. In particular, I want to welcome the family, friends, and peers joining us who knew Martin, followed his life's work, and were witness to his strong intellect, moral compass, quote, helping hand ethos, unquote, and unrelenting efforts challenging societal orthodoxies and the status quo. Born Martin Luther Kilson Jr. in East Rutherford, New Jersey on February 14, 1931. Martin was raised in the small factory town of Ambler, Pennsylvania, some 20 miles north of Philadelphia. That upbringing in the multi-ethnic, working class company town with a small yet strong Black community, buttressed by the church and integrated schools, helped shape Martin's life, both academically and socially, and would provide the foundation for Martin to reach the highest levels of academia. Martin graduated at the top of his class from Lincoln University, a historically Black college in Oxford, Pennsylvania, with a degree in political science in 1953, and went on to earn a master's and a PhD from Harvard's graduate school in 1958 and 1959, respectively. After finishing his doctorate at Harvard, Martin and Marion, who he married in August 1959, embarked on a 2-year trip overseas. A Ford Foundation fellowship allowed him to undertake research at Oxford University in England, followed by a period in Africa at the University of Sierra Leone, just before Sierra Leone's independence from England, which that work helped shape his early academic work in African studies. After returning to the United States in 1961, Martin was hired as a research associate at the Harvard Center for International Affairs and became a lecturer the following year. In 1964, he became an assistant professor in the Department of Government. And in 1969, Martin became Harvard College's first fully tenured Black professor and remained there for over 30 years. He was appointed the Frank G. Thomas Professor of Government in 1988, which he held until his retirement from teaching in 1999, and was appointed Professor Emeritus until his retirement in 2003. Throughout his career, Martin authored numerous books and dozens of academic articles. A Lexington resident for some 47 years, he passed away on April 24th, 2019, at the age of 88, and is buried at Westview Cemetery. He is survived by his 3 children, Jennifer, Peter, and Hannah, and 6 grandchildren. From there, I would like to welcome again Marion, and appreciate, we'll listen to a presentation from you to talk about Martin's life and work.
Thank you very much, Marc. I want to thank the Association of Black Citizens of Lexington, especially its president, Sean Osborne, for inviting me to participate in this evening's program. I also wish to acknowledge the Lexington Historical Society and the Cary Library for their co-sponsorship of this event. I'm delighted to be able to talk with you about Martin Kilson's memoir, A Black Intellectual's Odyssey from a Pennsylvania Milltown to the Ivy League. As Marc has just said, Martin lived in Lexington for 47 years, and his final resting place is in Westview Cemetery. I think it's important to recognize that this book is about Martin's life journey as an intellectual. It's a story of his professional life. It's not a story of his adult personal life. There is no mention in his text of Lexington or where he lived in Cambridge as a student and a young faculty member. When Martin Kilson died in the spring of 2019, he had completed the manuscript for his memoir and reviewed some of the early copy edits of it. After his death, I assumed responsibility for the next steps in the process of creating the book, working with 3 of his students who are contributors to the book. Cornell West, who wrote a spot-on foreword to the book, and Stefano Harney and Fred Moten, who not only wrote the afterword, but sent the completed manuscript to Duke University Press. After the press's decision to publish the memoir, I also selected photographs, wrote chapter abstracts, proofread galleys, drafted an index, and so forth. I think the best way to introduce the content of the book to you is to read some of Martin's preface. The idea of writing an autobiographical account of my life, starting with my growing up years and taking me all the way to where I find myself now in the position to look back on it all, occurred to me quite soon after I retired from my teaching and research obligations at Harvard University in 2003. I quickly realized I didn't want to focus only on the strictly personal features of my background. I wanted to relate something much greater, in fact, than my own life. To achieve this, I decided to examine the societal agencies through which I evolved as a Black citizen in an oppressive, oligarchical, white supremacist 20th century nation-state society. I endeavored to use the context of my memoir to relate the broader history that was unique to the small African-American community in the Northeast that was my home during the 1930s and 40s. Thus, in the following pages, I have also written a biography, essentially, of the two Black communities nestled in eastern Pennsylvania, most familiar to me, the factory town of Ambler, in which I spent my childhood, and the neighboring village of Penlyn, both of which arose in the 19th century. If you look at the table of contents for the book, you will see that 5 of the 9 chapters concern various aspects of Ambler: its Black churches, its racially integrated schools, unlike most of the schools in surrounding towns, the social mobility patterns of African Americans and Italian Americans, its racially and ethnically integrated teenage baseball team in a league where players on the other teams were either all white or all Black. He also notes the racial discrimination that African Americans encountered in Ambler in his growing up years, from lack of employment opportunities through discrimination in restaurants and hotels, to nearby parks that allowed Blacks to use their facilities one day in the year for annual church picnics. One of the important life themes for Martin emanated initially from his early life in Ambler and was reinforced by his Lincoln University experiences, the helping hand ethos. In the book, he described how his clergyman father helped parishioners during the Depression, how families encouraged the social mobility of their children by scrimping and saving to finance post-secondary education, how he was mentored by key faculty at Lincoln, including President Horace Mann Bond and political scientist John Aubrey Davis, and Martin himself as a faculty member at Harvard took a special interest in mentoring students, especially African American students. At Lincoln, Martin developed a left-wing political consciousness about African American realities in a racist society. He called his Lincoln years his understanding Blackness years, not only for a social and political view, but also for an appreciation of the folk ideas undergirding Black life. At Lincoln, Martin opposed the fraternities to which a majority of his classmates belonged. His opposition to Greek fraternities stemmed not only from his disdain for the brutal and demeaning hazing the pledges endured, as well as the frivolous hedonism of their activities, but their lack of interest in civil rights activism with which Martin and his liberal circle friends were concerned. After graduating as valedictorian of his Lincoln class in 1953, he entered Harvard as a graduate student in political science, and as Marc has mentioned, receiving his MA degree in 1958 and his PhD in 1959. As a graduate student, he had a liberal circle of Black friends and looked askance at Black students who avoided civil rights activist roles. After completing his PhD, Martin had a Ford Foundation Fellowship to study political development in Sierra Leone on the eve of independence before returning to Harvard. His Sierra Leone research led to his first monograph, Political Change in a West African State, that Harvard University Press published in 1966. As a faculty member at Harvard, Martin began by teaching about African politics before branching out to teach as well about politics and society among African Americans. And throughout his final decade of teaching, he also, at the request of his department chair, taught a course on political culture of white ethnic groups. Although he continued to teach courses on African topics, after the mid-1990s, he no longer wrote about African political development. Let me read how he explained that decision. I was nudged away from African studies toward full-time work in African American studies. As the political culture character of African states tilted so massively in full-fledged authoritarian directions, riddled with cynical and massive corruption, vicious interethnic violence, and mean-spirited anti-intellectualism. I lost that early visceral pro-African nationalist movement empathy that was communicated to me during my undergraduate years at Lincoln University. Mentoring students, especially Black students, was a special focus of Martin's role as a faculty member. In a 1999 article, he articulated his aims as a mentor, and I quote, "In that formative phase of the 1960s, progressive Black faculty at white institutions did two crucial things. First, we impressed upon activist Black students the need to infuse one's commitment to Blackness with a spirit of cosmopolitan humanism so that one is able to guard against chauvinistic and mean-spirited forms of ethnic activism. Second, we emphasize that African American students had an obligation toward a kind of dual fidelity. Fidelity to modernist achievement and rigorous academic behavior on the one hand, and to Black folks' honor, to the best traditions of Black culture on the other. At the outset of my remarks, I mentioned that this book is about Martin's professional career, but it necessarily omits certain aspects of that career. For example, he does not mention his long-term membership on the editorial board of the socialist magazine Dissent, which over 30 years, he wrote 20 articles and designed 2 issues, one on African topics and the other on African American topics. He does not mention his years on the board of the National Endowment for the Humanities, where he helped award funding from worthwhile projects from across the country. Rather, he tells you about his intellectual maturation over his lifetime. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to introduce a Black intellectual's Odyssey from a Pennsylvania milltown to the Ivy League.
Thank you, Marion, for that great review and insight into the memoir and how it came to be. Had just a few questions for you regarding it and how it came to be. You reflected a little bit about how the book, talks a lot about Martin's public life, and wondering, you reflected a little bit about it with him and what the memoir was to serve as a public, testimony. Is there anything that he was specifically, trying to get across with the theme in or was it just talking about his journey generally, and what it meant to him to try to put it to words?
Yeah, I think it was essentially his journey. as he saw it.
Great. In reading the memoir, I was really touched by just the family, his time in Ambler, and then talking about the history in Ambler of his descendants there, as well as just the impact that it has on him growing up there and the time that he spent there. It had a huge impact, but Ambler still had a special place in his heart throughout his life after leaving Ambler. And can you reflect a little bit on that and some of the journeys that he took to returning to Ambler?
Right. Well, he returned often to Ambler. We always came on Memorial Day. He always contributed to the Rose Valley Cemetery, which is the Black Cemetery in Ambler, and he created booklets every year of the veterans who are buried there and their history. And you often brought Lawrence Dunbar's poem to read to people at the ceremonies on Memorial Day. And he came back to Ambler for funerals, sometimes to give talks, but it was very much a part of his life. And his family had been among the founding families in the little neighborhood where he lived, and that his neighborhood was unusual because the Black families were homeowners in that neighborhood. And of his grandfather and great-grandfather had been carpenters and built a number of the houses on the street where he lived. And his mother had the rent from those houses after she was divorced.
Yeah, that was powerful. Part of and he was. It's in the memoir. You can tell that he was so appreciative of that, and the strength that his mother was able to display, but being able to have a place to go after the divorce definitely helped him have some stability after the divorce, which was helped propel him towards a brighter future, which was definitely evident. After that, was curious. Was with his time at Lincoln, and specifically just the mentorship that he received, from the president of Lincoln, Horace Mann Bond, and specifically what did that relationship mean to him, and what sort of I was touched by the you reflected on it during your discussion regarding his examination of the Black student body, whether it was the fraternity students that were part of fraternities and part of that, but then also the students that were more activists and liberal activists, that divide. He really tried to challenge the status quo, and I'm just curious how the relationship with the president, and then his time at Lincoln, if you can add anything there.
Well, his relationship with Horace Mann Bond continued until Horace died in 1972. And in fact, Martin tried to get Horace a position at Harvard, which he didn't succeed in doing, but he did try. And Martin was very loyal to the institutions and the people who made it possible for him. He was very loyal, for example, to Professor Rupert Emerson, who was his mentor throughout his career at Harvard, from his graduate student years on. And when Rupert retired and was no longer a powerhouse in the department, Martin always, um, regularly had lunches with him, and we often went to his house. So he had that kind of really very strong loyalty to the institutions and the people who helped him along the way. And that was not only true at Lincoln, but also of his Harvard experience.
I understand that after you had traveled, after he had finished his studies, and then you traveled to England and then to Sierra Leone in Africa after that. And that was just after you were married. Curious what the collaboration there that you got to work together on, and some of the work that had gone on there just before he, it seemed like it set the basis for his early work with African studies, and what sort of, just a little bit more color about your time there, and what, how it influenced, you talked a little bit about it in the presentation, but anything that you would care to add there?
Well, it was our first of 5 research trips to West Africa. And it was a really wonderful time in that we knew sort of everybody up and down the social scale, from people who had no education and maybe did not even speak English, to those who were highly educated and active participants in the political life of the colony. We traveled all over Sierra Leone, and as he says in the book, he didn't have a license then, so I did all the driving. And we went to all the provincial capital, all the provincial towns, and met with the district commissioners, people who were on the town councils, and a lot of notes about a lot of documents along the way. So it was a very interesting and happy time. And as I said, it was the first of 5 research trips to West Africa. And
where were the other were there other trips that you took to West Africa?
Yeah. Well, in 1962, the Harvard sent us on a trip down the coast, starting in Dakar and ending up in Lagos. And along the way, we, again, met people and did some sort of research. I was supposed to be doing research on women in politics, but I don't think I did very much of that. And then in 1963-64, we went to Ghana, where we lived for a year at the university. And we also did both of us taught a course there. I taught a course with Professor St. Clair Drake on African urbanization. I don't remember what Martin's course was. And I did the research for my doctoral dissertation that time. And we had 2 small children at the time. And then in 68, we went back I had a grant to study Play Lala, the Ga religion. And we took all 3 children that summer. And one of my students is a filmmaker and also as a babysitter. And then again, the last time we went was in 1972, when I had a little grant to do more work on in Sierra Leone on Mende oral literature. And I was there for 4 weeks, and then Martin came out and joined me for a couple of weeks. So he really didn't do much research that. But those are the times we went to West Africa.
Great. Well, I appreciate that, sharing that information and those stories. Moving on to just his time at Harvard, he, I know he had a long career at Harvard, and even though he was part of the academic, intellectua at Harvard, I know that it sounds like he always considered himself still an independent and almost like an outsider, even though he was an academic there. But at the same time, I see, if you could share a little bit about that, of just his independent streak and how he felt as being an outsider, but then also just the impact that he had on students and the mentorship that he had, both reflected in the book with a few pictures of, with some of his students and the gatherings they had, even through after his retirement, that they still continued to gather, frequently in order, just that influence. So just reflecting on his time at Harvard and what that played in his life.
Well, it's obviously very important in his life. And his students were very important to him. In fact, he has in his transformation of African-American intelligentsia, 1880 to 2012, which is his prize-winning book, he has a long tribute to his former students. And maybe I'll just read you a little bit of that, about the students who he influenced and who influenced him. So in his acknowledgements, he says, among the students I wish to thank are Derek Cephas, corporation lawyer, Leonard S. Coleman, former president of the National League, Major League Baseball, Lee A. Daniels, staff member of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, David Dixon, professor at George Washington University, Michael Eastman, entertainment lawyer, Karen Fields, professor at Rochester University, Christopher Foreman, professor at George Washington University, Michael Eastman, entertainment lawyer, Karen Fields, professor at Rochester, Christopher Foreman, professor at the University of Maryland, Robert Hall, professor at Northeastern University, Charles Jordan Hamilton, corporation lawyer, Averita Hanson, civil rights lawyer, Charles Jordan Hamilton, corporation lawyer, Stefano Harney, professor at Queen's Mary College, University of London, James Hoyt, lawyer and Harvard administrator, Lowell Johnson, corporation lawyer, Lewis Jones, finance investor, Eugene Matthews, finance investor, Tanya Jenrette, corporation lawyer, Fred Moten, professor at Duke University, Michael Robinson, corporation lawyer, Doug Schoen, election pollster, Jeffrey Dignos, civil rights lawyer, Jerry G. Watts, professor at City University of New York, Cornel West, professor at Princeton University, Marc Whitaker, former editor of Newsweek magazine, Ernest Wilson, professor at University of Southern California, and Robert Yarbrough, legal counsel at Pace University. So that gives you an idea of the people who influenced him and whom he influenced. And it was a very important part of his life.
No question. And it just shows the influence that he had that touched in all aspects of society with those tentacles. So that's really powerful to know that his legacy lives on in them, and then they had such a great impact on him as well and his work. And then he was a Lexington resident for a long time, a New Englander, I'm just curious if you have any reflections about, was there anything that he, particularly, why you chose Lexington to some extent at the time, and then, anything that you, can share that that Martin, why you guys chose to be longtime residents of Lexington.
Right. Well, we sort of accidentally came to Lexington. We'd been living in one of my half-sister's houses in Cambridge, and she decided to give her son the house, and he decided to charge Cambridge rents, and we decided we had to move. And so I started looking, and I found a place in Belmont that I thought was possible. And Martin looked at it and said it wasn't possible. So I said, okay, you go find a place. And so for a long time, he went out searching. And I don't know quite how it happened, but at any rate, the people who owned the house before we did, the Samborskis, Mr. Samborsky was a colleague of Martin's in Dudley House, and he invited Martin to come and look at his house. And he had looked at so many houses and said no. But I said, okay, it's bigger than what we need, and so we bought it. And that's how we came to Lexington, semi-accidentally. And in terms of Lexington, he wasn't the good citizen that you are, in terms of being such an active participant. But he certainly, we had a Chinese restaurant on Waltham Street in the early days that we enjoyed going to a lot. And in later life, we had a lot of Starbucks coffee. And I think it was just, it was a good place to lay his head.
Great, thank you for that. So what I'm going to ask the audience is we have some, we have a Q&A open, and if there's any questions that they might have for Marion, about the memoir, about Martin, feel free to share. I did notice that among the participant, one of the people that you mentioned as one of his students was Jamie Hoyt, or one of his peers was Jamie Hoyt. If I can't remember if it's student or peer, but he's also on this, one of the participants tonight. But I just wanted to reflect that. In any case, if you have any questions, feel free to enter them into the Q&A button at the bottom of the page, and we can, we'll answer them as best we can. One other thing that I noticed while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I noticed that, in the memoir, he talks about the election of Barack Obama, and just that, a little bit as I was struck by the, as a student of government myself, just the, talking about the social impacts of who, how did he actually get elected, and specifically, where did he get where did the support come from? And everybody talks about, well, not everybody, but many people talked about after he was elected, we're in a post-racial society. We now have, and obviously we've seen how that's changed. We've been, actually maybe gone a different way, but I was curious just the reflections about that. And then anything about the current political, climate that we're in, what he would, what he thought of the election of our first Black president, and a little bit about just the current political climate, if you had any
Right.
testimonies regarding that.
I think that his essay really about Obama's election is about the significance of the Black voter bloc and how it was crucial in his election.
Yep.
And I think he would have been extremely upset by the Trumpian years. And he would be very supportive, I think, of Biden's efforts and would hope for his greater success.
Thank you for that. So we have a couple of questions here. Well, one reflection was Jamie was one of Martin's students, and he was his advisor his junior year during Jamie's junior year at in Harvard. So that's great. And then we have another question. Well, we have another reflection from Hannah. She said that didn't the Samaraskis sell the house in part because they were some of the other white residents in Lexington made the commitment to sell their home to an African-American family to counter the racial covenants that existed in suburban communities. She was just wondering if that was truly the case or any reflections.
I don't know.
What, sorry?
I don't know.
Okay.
She may be right.
And then we have another question asking about if you could talk or reflect a little bit more about Martin's view of the Pan-Africanism and how that changed over time. He had and how he kind of went away from the African studies towards Afro-American studies generally.
Right. Well, I think I did read to you the section in which he talked about how he became so disheartened by what was happening in African societies, and he no longer had that really Pan-Africanist sentiment that he'd had as a younger person. So I don't think I can add more than that to that. Okay.
Well, thank you for that. And then we had a question, Professor Kilson, and I guess it was a former student, Jessie Steigerwald, and she's wondering how it worked out to be at a family with two academics. And you mentioned a little bit about the challenges of managing family and research and travel and grant projects. And what advice would you have for those who are currently working to further their intellectual and academic work, and while trying to help their family thrive? Any advice that you have there?
No, not really. I think that I think the expectations are easier for women now than they were when I was coming along, because it was exceptional for people to be professional women, as so many women are today. And I think it's always a balancing act. And we were very, very lucky because we had as a babysitter for 14 years the same person. And she was like a member of our family in every way. And she certainly made it possible for me to do what I did. So I hope people are able to get the kind of support they need, because you do need it. And I was lucky to have it.
That's great. We have another question from Ruth Budd regarding, does Martin talk about in the book about his experience as a Black man at Harvard or in Lexington? And did he feel you, or did you or he feel racial prejudices as a critical feature of your lives during your lives, here in Lexington and in Eastern Massachusetts, I guess?
That's an interesting question. I don't think so. I don't think that was a major factor in our lives. We always had a very diverse group of friends. Many of them were academics, not all of them were. And so I'm sure there are people who didn't necessarily associate with us who might have, but it really didn't affect us.
Thank you for that. So we have another question from Joellen Masters, thanking us for she really enjoyed the book. And then she had a question about the photographs. I'll read from what she says, is all the photographs encourage such an active reading practice because I love tracing names, faces, places. The photographs documented with the narratives development. At the beginning of your presentation, Marion, you described the different stages of how the book came to be. And you said you had chose and organized all the photographs. I guess she's wondering about the luxury and responsibility choosing all those photographs brought and meant for you. That development and any insight that you can share regarding how that came to be, and how those photographs help tell the story.
Yeah. Well, I guess I looked at photographs that reflected his change over the years. And I looked at sort of key experiences. So you might have noticed that there is a photograph of our family and in Harper's Ferry. Well, for four summers, we as a family spent a weekend together in different places. We went first to Gettysburg, and then we went to Washington because we wanted to see the memorial to the soldiers who were in the colored troops during the Civil War. And Martin's great-grandfather's name, Jacob Laws, is on that monument. And then we went to Harper's Ferry for John Brown. And finally, we went to Lincoln University because Martin wanted his grandchildren to see where he went to college. So that was background behind the Harper's Ferry picture. And I wanted to, the picture of his family that when he was 2 years old is a wonderful one because it shows what they all looked like at that time. And he's pouting because his mother's just taking his bottle away from him.
That's great.
So I wanted to show pictures that showed the evolution of his life. And that's why they're the childhood pictures that are there. And, his Ambler Tiger baseball team, that was very important to him. And also to the Letterbohr family, made that all possible for that group of youngsters. So it was a question of trying to highlight aspects of his life.
Great, thank you. Another question from Auden Carter was, can you elaborate on how Martin adapted to the culture on Harvard's campus over the years after developing and coming into his own intellectually at an HBCU like Lincoln?
Oh, well, I think he does talk a little bit about that in the book, and that he sought out same kinds of activist students that he'd known as an undergraduate. And he mentions a couple of the people who were really important in that process. Max Bond, who was a nephew of Horace Van Bottom's, who was in the School of Design at the time. And so it was really finding those kinds of people. And also he had good friends among African students who were also in graduate school at the same time as he was. And those were lifelong friendships as well.
Yeah.
I don't know that really answers this question.
Yeah, no, I thought it did. I don't know if there's anything in closing that you'd want to share that regarding his time, both Harvard or in Lexington generally, or that you would, that was, I wanted to give you at least a final forum
Well,
to share
I
regarding.
think it's important to know that he didn't want to be beholden to people. And an example of that was when Henry Louis Gates proposed that he have a portrait painted of him. And Martin said, no, thank you. And the painter called, and Martin said, no, I told Professor Gates I didn't want that. And Professor Gates and the portrait painter called, and he said, no, I don't want that. And I said, why don't you want it? And he said, then I would be beholden to him and I couldn't criticize him. So it was more important to be able to criticize him than not.
To challenge him. Yeah, that's the way, and that's what comes across in the book so beautifully. And we need more of that as in society. Challenging, but to keep our democracy and to keep our society moving in a positive direction.
Well, actually, Martin did get a portrait painted because Alan Counter, who ran the wonderful Harvard Foundation, decided that he wanted to sponsor a number of portraits of people, African Americans and women, to counter all the white men on Harvard walls. And so Martin didn't like what was done originally. And Alan called me out of a meeting, a foundation meeting in New York, and said, what am I going to do? Martin says he doesn't like the picture. And I said, well, you can do two things. You can not make any changes and hang it after Martin dies, or you can make changes that he asked for. And ultimately, the changes he asked for were made, although Martin said he didn't get his skin color right. But anyway, so he does have hard pictures.
Well, thank you, Marion, for all that insight and your reflections on how the memoir came to be, and how you, and the impact that Martin, the spirit of Martin and his work comes out in the book, and I appreciate all the insights that you provide. Thank you to the audience for all the questions that you shared with us, we'd ask you, thank you for joining us during this program, and we ask you to fill out a brief survey to give some feedback, letting the library know how you felt about the program and what your thoughts were. there. But thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. I urge you all to continue to explore during Black History Month and all the other months of the year regarding the strong history of our residents here in Lexington, of various races and backgrounds that contribute to the culture and fabric of our small town. So thank you again, Marion, for your work with here and sharing all your insights this evening. I look forward to getting to work with you again in the future.
Thank you.
With that, I'll pass. I guess thank you, everybody, for joining us, and I hope you have a good evening. Thanks.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Marion and Marc,
Marc.
for a wonderful program this evening. Have a good evening, everyone.